Solberg,
Tyson Liffrig,
Emma Nelson,
Katie Keach.
During World War II, over 3% of the 1940s world population died due to the power of words. This information is according to Renata Kostelova, who has a degree from Charles University, presented at the European Research Conference in the journal Comparative European Research, published in 2018.
We have all taken a history class at one point in our lives and have learned how different countries use the power of words as well as images as weapons during trying times such as World War II.
World War II was a very prominent time for the use of propaganda.
First, we will discuss propaganda techniques in Germany, second in the United States, third in Great Britain, and finally in Japan. The propaganda techniques used during World War II in Nazi Germany was weaponized in a way that set up Germany for the complete implementation of fascism. Before World War II, Germany's government was considered the Weimar Republic from 1919 to 1933. This government was not associated with the militarism or authoritism of Prussia, but was created by European countries after World War I to limit Germany's power. This government was considered very weak and angered the citizens of Germany, for they had lost almost everything after World War I due to the fact that Germany was forced to accept loss of territory and pay all reparations of the war. This opened up a gateway for a new leader of Germany who would give the strong, powerful country these citizens so desperately wanted back. This leader was Adolf Hitler. Through the use of images, words, and video, Adolf Hitler was able to manipulate the minds of the Germans into creating a place that was very fearful for some to live. Renata Kostelova, with a degree from Charles University, presented at the European Research Conference, CER, Comparative European Research, in 2018, described many of Hitler's ideas for Germany, such as the purification of the Aryan race. With his many ideas, such as purification, eliminating those who were seen unfit using whatever means necessary, Hitler implemented his autobiography, Mein Kampf, also known as the Nazi Bible, to shape the minds of those living in this era. Stefani Fontana, with a PhD in human and molecular genetics from Johns Hopkins University, in her publication for Western Sydney University, issued in 2021, states how the use of emotions was very important in Nazi propaganda. Hitler would use these emotions to target the everyday individual who feels dejected and undervalued until he could gain their support through collective experiences of heightened emotion and the thought of being a part of something greater. One emotion he emphasized the most importance on was nationalism. The feeling of nationalism gave the people of Germany hope after losing everything after World War I. Hitler saw this as an opportunity and used this emotion and many others in his propaganda. One will see that through the use of the nationalist passion in German statements such as Es lebe Deutschland, meaning long live Germany, and the imagery of flags and masses lining up behind him, Hitler was able to gain the support of the citizens of Germany. Along with this, Hitler would also portray himself as Christ-like in many of his images. One example is he would use the light shining down on him and the Nazi war eagle to symbolize the light shining down on Christ and the dove that descended over his head. Nazi propaganda was spread along all platforms of communication, having it embedded in children's stories, TV shows, songs, school curriculum, and after-school children's programs to train children in Nazi principles such as Hitler Youth. Hitler was able to use Nazi propaganda as militarized speech to enforce many of his fascist ideas. Like Germany, the United States used propaganda techniques to influence the citizens of their country.
America is David Welch, a professor of modern history and the director of the Center for Study of War, Propaganda, and Society at the University of Kent, in the book World War II Propaganda, Analyzing the Art of Persuasion During Wartime, published in 2017, said that America used propaganda to orient troops and motivate its civilian population. Propaganda was a large part in convincing America to not stay neutral throughout the war since they started neutral. It also helped convince people to help the war effort any way they could. This included buying war bonds and enlisting in the U.S. Army. For people that weren't allowed to enlist in the Army, like women, there were other options like boosting production or working in factories, growing your own food, and saving any materials that you may throw away for later use. The use of comics and cartoon characters in American propaganda kept the American people entertained and kept their attention. Trisha Goodnow, a professor at Oregon State, and James Kimball, an associate professor in the Department of Communication and Arts at Seton Hall University, in the book The 10-Cent War, Comic Books, Propaganda, and World War II, published in 2017, said that the comic book industry had no problem and was not subtle about using their influence to show the Axis powers as enemies in the war. The fun and entertaining pictures and images of cartoons and comics kept the attention and the minds of U.S. citizens. The use of films and TV as propaganda also really helped gain the attention, as it was very entertaining for the people. Ralph Donald, a mass communications professor at Southern Illinois University, in the book Hollywood Enlists, Propaganda Films of World War II, published in 2017, says that the newer invention of the television brought the persuasive power of propaganda directly into U.S. homes. So not only were people seeing this propaganda out in the streets and in stores, it was also being brought into their homes, which resonated with them more. William Murphy, a former U.S. representative from the 3rd Congressional District of Illinois, in the book The Japan-American World War II Propaganda and Its Cultural Context, published in 2021, says that the United States enlisted Hollywood filmmakers to produce powerful yet effective films to characterize the enemy and provide a moral basis for waging war on the Axis powers. This made the citizens of America feel very strongly about joining the war, and then they wanted to take action. These films made propaganda entertaining and made joining the war seem worthwhile. Another one of the Allies, Great Britain, also used propaganda to its advantage.
Great Britain first entered the war when it started in 1939, and they fought all the way until 1942 when it ended. King George VI elected the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, to be the leader of the country. Great Britain was a part of the Allied powers, so their propaganda was centered around defeating communism as well as rationing so they would have enough supplies for the war. David Monger, a doctor in philosophy and a member of the Fellow International Society for First World Studies, in the journal Tangible Patriotism, written in 2018, states that the main part of their propaganda was to get people to ration and follow the rules so they would have enough food and money for the soldiers in the battlefield. With the money that they saved, the soldiers were able to get more weapons, ammunition, and vehicles. Daniel Mander Thomas, a historian and cultural studies scholar with a PhD in modern languages from the University of Oxford, in the journal Media History, published in 2021, states that Great Britain also used their propaganda to get people to encourage people to enlist in the army. There was about 3.3 million that served for Great Britain, and about half of them enlisted on their own. The other half were recruited. Now we will talk about the way images and words looked in Japan.
The influence that Japan's propaganda had on people wasn't only affecting the people in Japan, but also affected people from other countries. Japan used propaganda to influence other countries that it would be best to be under Japan's power as well. As seen in some propaganda, Japanese would make it look like it would be best to be with Japan during the war, and that it would be most beneficial for countries like Manchuria and China to be under their power at the time. During World War II, Japan was also in another war with China. Japan was trying to get China and other Asian countries around them to be under Japan's power. That's why they needed propaganda like this, to make it look like being under Japan's power was more beneficial rather than being with like the Allied powers or other powers around them. That information is according to Russell Horton, who is a reference archivist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum and the journal Wisconsin Veterans Museum, published in 2018. Another thing that had a great effect on Japanese propaganda is the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor occurred on December 7th, 1941. After this attack, that was a surprise to the U.S. The U.S. had to become involved in the war. The Japanese Americans that were in the United States were no longer trusted by the United States people. Japan had to gain back the trust of not only its own people, but people around the world in other countries. According to Wardapol Hayat Aden, a professor at the University of Technology, Mara, with a doctorate in competency and social studies in the Journal of Media and Information Warfare, published in 2020, it was going to be very difficult for the Japanese to win the trust back of the people who no longer trusted them from this attack. The Japanese excuse and use of things in propaganda were very racially charged in order to justify their attack on Pearl Harbor. People did not see the reasoning behind their attack on the United States at the time, and Japan put in their propaganda a lot of racially charged images or reasoning that would allow for some people to believe that Japan had reasons for their attack on Pearl Harbor. Japan not only had to win back the trust of their own people and other countries, but they also had to find ways to help Germany win the war. During World War II, Japan was a part of the German and Italian powers, and they were not on the sides of other countries like the UK and the United States. Japan had to work very hard in their propaganda in order to win back the trust of people all over the world.
First, we discussed propaganda techniques in Germany, second in the United States, third in Great Britain, and finally how propaganda played a role in Japan.
World War II was a very prominent time for the use of propaganda.
During World War II, 3% of the 1940s population will perish due to the power of propaganda.
This means that not only by the power of words and weapons, that half of the first grade class at Zembroda Mazeppa would have been killed if